Morning, everybody. Hope you all are doing well today. Just wanted to mention a couple quick things before we begin. First and foremost, your third reflection paper of invention is going to be due at 11:59 on Friday of this week. That's March 30th. So make sure that you will turn that in. Post haste. Remember that if you have any questions about it, please let me know. I've had a couple of people email me thus far, but still relatively quiet on this regard. Do not hesitate. So I went over everybody's paper. They're all graded now. Finally, I caught up to it. And the big thing that I want to make sure that there are a couple things in place in terms of what I want y'all to think about for this next paper. First and foremost, I couldn't help but notice there was quite a few people that, although I appreciate the idea of bringing in anecdotes, and as it was kind of the example for the second paper, please try to make sure you don't write how you speak. I had a lot of people who really went so far as to almost have conversations with themselves within the paper. So we want to make sure we curb that a little bit, so that, again, we're dealing with formality here, because each paper is supposed to be progressively more difficult as we get into this area. So again, make sure that as you're going into each paper, where you're assessing it from, again, that this is going to be a little bit more difficult than the last one in terms of expectations, and in terms of difficulty of, how I look through these. So, most people did very well on these. I will mention, please do not try to mess around with the margins, anything like that. I noticed there are still a couple of people that have been kind of pushing up against the edge when it comes to 2 to 3 pages and messing with the margins. So some of them were like 2-inch margins. So again, don't try to, mess with anything in terms of your font size or anything like that. Keep it consistent. Keep it to where it's following by the instructions. And, we won't have any problems. So, again, this is just something I want to make sure everybody knows before they get in. I also want you to make sure that you cite things correctly. Couldn't help but notice. Now, a lot of y'all are doing MLA. Still, there's some errors with MLA. Still, there's a lot of errors with APA. Again, I want to make sure you're doing these right, just in case you decide that, again, you want to pursue some of these papers, want to pursue some of these ideas, want to show some of these ideas. You want to make sure that they're formatted correctly in this case. So, again, for the most part, they were pretty well written. They were really interesting, and I really enjoyed reading them, in terms of, a lot of people talking about car sales, pyramid schemes, family relations with each other in terms of how we've been persuaded by one or another. Some of them were really funny. I really enjoyed some of the stories that I read, especially with those talking about persuasion in your children, which were really cool to listen to, per your discussion in your paper. So, again, really appreciate those. So, but again, this paper upcoming is going to be very difficult in terms of the aspects of trying to establish something new with these theories. So again, if you need any help, let me know. This is a very important piece of information that we need to be talking about. The other thing I'll mention is next week is going to be your midterm. So again, I put up the study guide on As You Learn, so make sure you're looking through that. Make sure you email me with any questions you might have on that. Starts Wednesday at 6 a.m., ends Friday at 11:59 p.m. So again, make sure you're getting on that. Make sure you're understanding the material. It is open book, but again, read through everything, because it's a lot to read through if you don't know where you're looking. So I want to make sure you've got ample amount of time. Again, it's going to be 75 minutes, so it should be plenty of time. But I do want you to know where to look for everything. So that's basically it for the things that are due. The next thing I want to talk about is we're getting into the short rows, really, of our course. And one of the things I want to mention in particular is the ideology in terms of advertising. But before we do that, I do want to talk a little bit about the notion of what does it mean to have commitment? What does it mean to be consistent? And some of you actually approached this in your paper per Cialdini, and I think a lot of y'all had a pretty decent grasp on it. There were a couple things that I said, well, that's mostly right. But there are some areas that really need to be further evaluated for us to get this, in its entirety. So I want to mention a couple things here. And that's first and foremost that we as people like to be consistent with our attitudes and values and beliefs. And there's a couple things that go into this. First, so there's three things that mainly go into this. First, personal consistency is really highly valued. We don't enjoy people that are kind of wishy-washy in this case. So this is why people have a hard time with like presidential candidates that kind of flip-flop from issue to issue in terms of the side they stand on. I know Hillary Clinton had a tough time with this in terms of her stance on gay marriage when it came to an earlier segment where she was going up for when she was talking about this as First Lady, and then when she was going up to President, it was two different stances. Now, you could attribute it as, Hillary is just coming up with the times, she's understanding things more, she's becoming more educated, and thus changing a belief. Whereas other people would say this is wishy-washy. She's taking a stance that's different from what she believed in prior. And so a lot of people will have problem with that. Again, your opinion of that is on you. But at the same time, again, that flip-flop is a major area of what a lot of people don't like when it comes to this consistency. Our natural stances sometimes change over time. But, at the same time, in many ways, we want to hold our core values to stay the same and be true in this case. So that's the first thing. So again, personal consistency is highly valued. The second is consistent conduct is a beneficial approach to daily life. Erratic behavior, it can also confuse others and ourselves. We like consistency in rules. So when I was younger, for instance, I wanted to make sure that if I committed a certain action, it was either going to be praised or scolded. And if I did the same action and I was praised once and then scolded another, then I'm confused. I would often talk about this with my folks about this when dealing with our dog. Our dog likes to jump up on people's laps. And so for the most part, my mother tries to tell the dog to get off the furniture, stay off the furniture, don't jump up, that kind of thing. And yet occasionally she'll let the dog jump on her lap. And again, praise the dog for it. And again, I'm sitting there going, that's confusing for a dog, for anybody. If, again, we want to make sure that things are consistent when it comes to rule setting. So again, if I'm praised one time doing the same behavior and scolded on another, it's very confusing. So that's a main thing in terms of this area of erratic behavior, where we want to put a sense of reliability on this, because that way we know what to expect. So again, if we see people who compulsively lie, or we see people who kind of show up late or on time at different areas, we don't know what to expect. So it's kind of an area of we don't know whether to trust that person. And this is a major one. The third one is consistency provides a shortcut through complexity. And this is an area that we've talked about in the past, which is availability heuristics. And through the availability heuristics, we're talking about mental shortcuts here. I've often heard the phrase, stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And it's an interesting colloquialism. And I know a lot of people who quote it, who use it, who are very strongly tied with this colloquialism. And maybe you are too. And that's, in a way, it's not inherently a bad thing to think this way, to think that you need to stand for something that you really believe in. Otherwise, you get fallen into traps of some areas that, again, may not inherently be what you're looking for or go against your core values. But think about this sentiment, and I'm not challenging this in the way that I think that it's wrong. But there is, like anything, some inconsistencies with it. So how far are we willing to let that sentiment go? We talked about a little bit about Robert Cialdini, or excuse me, we talked a little bit about Leon Fessinger, and Leon Fessinger took this notion of cults, for instance. And again, I'm not proposing that this sentiment is related specifically to cults. It's not. But as they found in their research, these cults found that they had kind of this same mentality where they had to stand up for something in terms of what they thought was going to happen with the rest of the world. Until what point? So they decided that this would be a specific day when it was going to happen, when they were going to be lifted from earth into the heavens, and essentially saved in this case. But it didn't happen. So in this case, this is a very difficult thing in terms of your dissonance. Do you keep believing when this goes away, when this is established as not being true? Sorry, my email's going off. This is an extreme example. But how many of us have removed all dissonance based on what we wanted to uphold a belief based on this colloquialism? Again, if we start to disagree on certain things, that may, make us stronger in terms of why we have those opinions in the first place. I went to a small Christian school when I was younger, and we were always exposed to different religions. And one of the reasons is we wanted to see what are the challenges that other religions had. What are some of the messages that were good that other religions had? And fully understanding it, to understand where other people were coming from when, this proposition would be that we would go and talk to them. In this case. And so, I've since moved around in this case in terms of understanding religion, understanding belief structures, but I always wanted to keep an open mind of every single one of them, whoever I'm talking to, and understanding, because again, there's a lot of flaws within any religious system of organized religion here. And I'll say this, and this is really important, is sometimes dissonance is a great thing. Because it really makes us think about our ideas and choices and understanding whether they're right or wrong, or somewhere in between, because it's usually somewhere in between in terms of what our beliefs are. They're not always right and wrong in this case. So that's heavy, I know. But the next thing that I want to go over within Cialdini is the notion of compliance. First and foremost, gaining the initial commitment is key. So first and foremost, we have to get the people to join whatever it is that we're doing. So there has always been these stereotypes that go in with Greek life. Your fraternities and sororities, and so many stories about hazing and having all this difficult times with, trying to get to this level of commitment with this group that you're so fond of. And going through these difficult processes. And so I don't want to say it in terms of, what I think about Greek life or anything like that. I don't have a negative view on Greek life. But the notion that I can say is I'm not going to touch base on Greek life in terms of their hazing. But I will say that, I went through similar experiences within, I was part of a varsity ski team. You can see my little ski trophies in the background there. But I also, went through graduate school, and there is a rite of passage that goes with every single one of them. There wasn't any hazing per se as a ski team member, but it was incredibly difficult. I bled, I sweat, I cried on many occasions because I felt like on many occasions I couldn't do something. I was having a very difficult time adjusting, trying to lose weight, trying to build strength and endurance, and that's difficult. And all of it was for the fact that I wanted to make this team. I didn't even know that I would. This could have all been for nothing, where I trained and trained and trained, and I never would have even made the team. Now, thankfully, I did. I did well in my 4 years. Well, I think so anyway. But again, it's that whole notion of, what if I didn't get in? What if I continued to fail in this case of not being adequate enough? The same goes with grad school. Grad school, goodness gracious, I loved being in grad school, but it's tough. You don't make much money. For one thing, you pour so much into this process. You don't take another job. You're continuously studying and reading and writing and reading and writing, and grading and teaching, and there's so much going on here. The notion is that also in the future you won't make much money. Why are we still doing this? Again, we don't go into this profession for the money. It's fine money, but it's not, what we probably could be making if we decided to go into a think tank or a research firm or, whatever it may be, in this case. And if I didn't proceed through, that dissonance would have been colossal to overcome because I wouldn't have found any benefit. And there's that compliance there. When I came in, I knew what I was getting into. People have told me, you're going to hate a lot of part of it. You're going to feel alone through a lot of it. You are going to be very upset at certain parts. You are going to feel inadequate many times. You're going to feel like you can't do something. And that is, to some regard, that still happens to this day in many cases, because I still, feel that way of, can I make it through in this case? But again, it's that compliance gaining of, you can do it. You can pull through this. You can get through this. So, two of the most difficult parts of a PhD program were your comprehensive exams and your dissertation. And my comprehensive exams, my goodness, was 12 hours sitting in front of a computer, not all at once, but doing meta theory, my content area, which was advertising, as well as methodology. It was difficult. It was so difficult. And I kept thinking, I can't do this. This is not going to happen. I'm not going to pass this exam. And I might as well just kind of give up in this case. And, my dissertation chair just said, keep pushing through. You're going to do it. You're going to be able to do this. And again, with that compliance gaining, kind of kept me going, kind of pushing me through in terms of finishing what I needed to get done. And it was incredibly difficult. But, again, it got done in this case. So that's another thing to look at is compliance. Another thing that Cialdini talks about, and then that's really interesting, is erroneous commitment decisions. By staying on one side of the fence for the sake of staying on side of the fence, and not based on individually assessing each argument, what does that do to our commitment? You may agree to things that you have never imagined agreeing upon. So, interestingly enough, I received a paper from one of you about compliance gaining with a church leader, speaking about something that was controversial and taking a specific side on it. Now, this person was devout and going to church, listened to the authority figure that was delivering the message, and yet this person had a very distinct belief about something that was being said. And the notion was that if you are looking to be a part of this congregation, you need to believe what I'm saying. And it really didn't seem like the person who was writing this paper that made the notion that, no, I'm not going to look at this from the perspective of I'm just going to listen to you. I'm going to look at this from the perspective of the argument's sake and where my beliefs are. And that's a strong thing in terms of the dissonance between what's being said on authority and what your beliefs are. Does it change? And again, where do you sit in terms of your commitment? And this person didn't really think to see that it was right to say you're going to stay on this side just because this side is where you belong. In this case, again, individually assessing each argument is very key in this case in terms of making good commitment decisions. The last thing is resisting consistency pressures. Interesting, Cialdini talks about two of them. One is stomach signs, which is being pushed until we don't want to do it anymore. What is your breaking point? Where does your commitment end? I mean, This is the area where one of my professors could say anybody could be bought. It's just whatever the price is. And what is that breaking point to where you abandon everything that you say and say, you know what, this is enough money. I can do something that I wouldn't normally do in this case. I see it all over Facebook of, would you do something for $1 million? Depending on what it was. I mean, we may have all played that game at one point or another. But again, I look at this from, I think it was Jim Jones, the cult leader. Again, of all these erroneous commitment decisions, I'm kind of jumping back a little bit in terms of resisting some of these consistency pressures, is when things are increasing, things are getting into this notion of you don't want to do this anymore, or you don't believe this anymore. And to what point do you break and say, no, enough is enough. I can't do this anymore. Some people to this day will still say, I still believe in whatever was being said, even though it could be wrong, even though it could be erroneous, that kind of thing. The other one is the heart-to-heart, is knowing what I know now, would I make the same decision? This would be a very interesting topic, although it would probably get way too personal for many of you would like to disclose. Many of you could look back at your former self. Wow, okay. I'm running into the reincarnation here. Many of you could look at your prior selves, your younger self, and say, I would have done things much differently. Would you, though? And in this case, I sit here and talk about some of the areas that I think I screwed up on, or I did something really stupid. And I would say, would I do it again? And for the most part, I'd say, there are days I'd like to have back. But for the most part, I think that if I were to have that heart-to-heart with younger me, in this case, I'd say, you know what, you just keep doing what you're doing. It'll all pan out in the end. It'll all do well. But at the same time, again, there are definitely days you'd sit there and say, I'd kind of like back. Because, we all do stupid stuff. We all do things that we regret doing in this case. And again, understanding that consistency pressure, you might sit there and say, well, it didn't work for me really well in the past. Maybe I shouldn't do it again. Or you could say, this was a cool adventure. Maybe I should try it. It can always work in this case. So the bottom line that I want to address here, and this is a really important take that I think can really help, is many times our most influential voices are the ones within our own mind. And once dissonance hits, how can we do anything different? Again, dissonance can be an awesome thing. And, y'all mentioned in many cases that you have this opinion of whatever it may be that was so strong that you resisted a persuasion attempt. So a lot of you wrote about the fact that I resisted a persuasion attempt. That's great. In many cases, it's great that you have the ability to understand the arguments that are being said, logical fallacies, some of the weapons of influence that are being used, and to move past that. That's awesome. But the thing that we always have to remember is our biggest enemy can lie within our own brain, and trying to convince ourselves one way or the other. You may be on a certain fence when it comes to politically, religiously, whatever it may be. And there may be messages that conflict with some of the ideologies you might have. And where do you move in this case? Do you move at all? Do you strengthen yourself in those particular areas? And again, I think the biggest thing is to understand what the argument is, what's being said, and then move from there. Is you might move in a position you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. It may not be something that you're used to. It may be something that you're not comfortable with at first, but over time you get to understand where another opinion or value comes from in this case. So again, this is all based on logic. This is all based on your beliefs. And again, I'm not trying to sway you in one way or the other to anything, really. I'd really want you to keep your opinions and your understanding of things to yourselves. into your papers. I enjoy reading your different perspectives, and there are differing perspectives, and that's great. Again, this is the notion. I had an eyelash. This is the notion of phenomenology, and it's important. So I hope that when you keep writing, that these things are established in terms of your core values, in terms of what you think is important. But again, understand the areas of argument and understanding where, again, agreeing for the sake of agreeing is something we don't want to do, even though it's a very powerful tool within consistent commitment. And at what point do you find yourselves into moving in a different direction than you were in previous? And again, those aren't necessarily bad things. You might want to stand for something, but you might want to ride the wave a little bit and understand where, again, another viewpoint may be coming from. So, again, I know this one was kind of heavy in this case, but it is important. It is a very important topic to talk about, and I hope that you get something out of this. And but anyway, that's all I'm going to talk about today. On Tuesday, I'll cover a little bit more on Denton and Woodward. Other than that, we've got Theory Thursday, and then got to turn in your paper on Friday. So I hope you do well. I'm sure you will, and I will talk with you tomorrow. All right, thanks.